Hello, namaste, and Satnam, friends. You know what Satnam means, Jen?
I don't.
It means I am truth, otherwise
Oh,
known as I am truth. You can say it with the TH or you can say it with an F, whatever way you want to do it. Or it could actually otherwise be, I think it can also be translated as truth is my essence.
oh,
Yeah.
I like
You
it.
like that? So it's
I
almost like
like
the
it.
same thing as namaste. So if you see somebody walking down the street or you're saying hi to one of your chums, just be like, hey, Satnam.
All right. I
You
like
like
it.
that?
Yeah.
Learn that from Kundalini Yoga. And that's kind of the basis of what we're going to be talking about today. And I actually had this thought before we get started, Jen. There's this form of breath work that they teach a lot in Kundalini Yoga, which is breath of
Mm-hmm.
fire. And I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking today, I feel like dogs just perpetually do that all the time.
Yeah. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Explain.
Because, when dogs get hot and they do the whole,
Yeah.
they're a lot more spiritually evolved than we think.
Panting.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to it. Well, we call it panting, but that's
Yeah.
just a concept, right? Maybe at the deepest sort of level of that, they could be doing the breath of fire. They could have already actually had their Aquarian 1 and 2 certifications of Kundalini Yoga. We don't even
I
know.
mean, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we have a wonderful, actually, guest. Now that we're talking about Kundalini Yoga, this is going to be a really exciting one because I've been following Kundalini Yoga for a long time. We have a guest that's with us today that is really, really well versed in this sort of modality. Her name is Ramona. And Ramona, she utilizes meditation and sound to raise the frequency of consciousness. I'm just going to read off her intro because it sounds cool. Frequency of consciousness for the beginning and advanced meditator alike. Classically trained in piano, her understanding of music theory gives way to a unique sound experience that's a balance of the linear and nonlinear. Before she became a yogi, Ramona owned an agency in New York City and lived a completely different life. Her ability to truly understand the many challenges associated with Western ways instills an honest understanding for the modern day yogi and spiritual seeker. She first found Kundalini Yoga in 2003, and she started her teacher training in 2016. She actually trained alongside a gong master named Richard Brutus, and she's also certified in many things, one of those being holographic sound healer. And she studies also under the Dr. Paul Hubbard. She does a lot of really amazing things, Jen. She's also
Awesome.
really into Reiki as well.
What is
Yeah.
a holographic sound healer? I've never heard of
Oh,
that.
we're going to get into that. Everybody welcome
Right.
Ramona Soriano. How you doing, Ramona?
Hi
Welcome.
guys. Hi Eric. Hi Jen. Nice to see you guys. How are you today?
Yeah. Doing
Oh,
well. We're so happy to
doing
have you on.
fantastic.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, and where are you at in the world right now? You said you were in Joshua Tree.
I am in the Joshua Tree area. It's kind of I guess it's like a private property. I'm here off grid, but we do have internet that is accessible. I'm actually in a magic bus right now, as you can see. So usually I have like a
Ooh.
mic set up, and now I'm using these to do what we're doing right now. But I'm here for many different reasons, mainly a spiritual journey, I guess you could
Yeah.
say. And Source has led me here, and yeah, here to do the work and be of service. So yeah.
Yeah.
So when you say sources led you here, where were you before? How did you get here? Tell us about this journey?
Oh, the journey, I mean, depends on where we want to start, but I guess
Well,
yeah. What was that, Eric?
I was and I want to kind of just tread off of what Jen was talking about because I read your bio, and your experience seems to contain a very contrasting polarity of lifestyle decisions. You went from a New York businesswoman to a spiritual teacher. These stories are, I guess, some of the most compelling to me because, that machine is very difficult to turn away from for many people,
It is.
because you went from a very corporate type of lifestyle into a very spiritual type of lifestyle. And every now and again, you have a Jedi or a sannyasi or a sadhu or whatever it is that you want to call it, arises out of the wreckage of that machine. And you're one of those people. So if you can talk about how you went from that New York lifestyle to this one, that would be great.
Yes, I'd love to share with you. Well, I guess my story began in New York in many ways. I was running this little agency, this boutique agency representing commercial artists for advertising. And for basically creative advertising. So I was basically the liaison between my talent and also the client. Maybe it was like something like Pepto Bismol was one of my clients. Nike, Adidas, Marriott International. So I worked with a lot of big brands, and just basically booked a lot of different creative projects with them. And it was very lucrative. It was very successful. There were moments where it wasn't, but during the whole time, I was just kind of attached to, I guess, playing the game. And I knew that there was something that wasn't authentic about my life choices at the time. Like, I mean, I did, go to college. I lived in LA, and then I moved overseas for a bit. And then when I was in New York, I just kept on following this path and of like success. And at the back of my head, I always knew that I was doing so because I was maybe programmed to, or because it was expected from me, from my family. And I just realized that I was doing things mainly to satisfy others and some type of image. Maybe it's like the ego, and it just didn't feel right. And during the time that I was having, I guess you can call an awakening, what ended up happening was a lot of people on my dad's side of the family were passing away. It started with my dad's brother, and then about 5 months later, it was my dad's sister, and then and within like a 3 to 4 year period, it was like, I want to say 5 aunts, my uncle, my dad, and a niece that passed away. So it was like all in the same side of the family, not my mom's side. And I was just wondering what was going on. And like being in my 30s, like I was just thinking, well, for the most part, it's a blessing. Not that death is a blessing, but because I hadn't have to deal with these many deaths while growing up. So it also gave me an understanding into empathy and whatnot. But things just started to change. So when I lost a lot of family members, and especially including my dad, I just started to question life a lot more. And that led me into Kundalini Yoga Teacher training. That led me into just doing my everyday task in my agency, and just wondering, like, am I wasting my time? Are these things really worth what I'm doing? And at the same time, like living in New York, it can get very busy. And so, like buying like $15 shakes every day to go to my office, to like go in a happy hour. It was like a completely different lifestyle. And I really loved those moments. And I still like kind of, I guess you could say, yearn and like miss them. Part of me like also mourns for that life again in some ways, but I just knew that there was something bigger and better for me. So what ended up happening was with my agency, it eventually went out of business. It was in business a lot longer than I thought. So I was operating for 7 years, and I thought with digital I'd only operate for 3 years. So that was a blessing. But when it came down to closing down my doors, I was like, okay, what do I do now? And then I got a job. I was director of marketing for a digital agency for about a year, and it just wasn't a good fit. And then I was like, what am I going to do? And I was just like, what am I really chasing? So by the time I left New York, I made a few decisions because a couple things happened. Like after losing that job, I basically got fired. And I got a few job offers, and I'm just like, I don't want to do this. So what I ended up doing at the time was a lot of my friends that were like either like CEOs or like really busy, I started doing privates for them, like for free, to train with them, because I think I left New York end of 2018. So it was like 2 years after my certificate of Kundalini Yoga. And at that time when I was doing my certificate, I didn't think that I would ever become a teacher. I just thought I'd do it for fun, right? Because I have my own career. And then, I don't know, things just kept on falling apart. Like this world that I thought I needed to live in kept on like dissolving, and the meaning behind it also kept on like fading away. After my dad died, I know I'm going like back and forth, but he died in 2015. And then I took the training. And at that same time, I was also doing like ayahuasca. So I've done a few plant medicines, and it just got me more clear in terms of like purpose. So in that time, I got married, I got divorced, right? And then
oh my gosh,
I know.
You had some major life changes.
Married,
It's like
divorced.
the ultimate dark night of the soul right there.
Oh yeah. And then decided I'm going to stop my career, like and then I was like, I'm going to go back home to LA and teach yoga. And when I heard myself say it, like the head part of myself came in. I was like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Like that was like my self-talk. I was like, am I crazy? Like, especially having an Asian family, I'm just like, they're all going to think I'm a complete loser. Like, you know, all these thoughts and insecurities kept on like surfacing. And then, and I just went ahead with it, and I did have criticism from my family, and I do have moments that are imperfect, and I have moments where I kind of like, you know, have like these sporadic outbursts. But when you go into a life that you're not used to, it takes time to adjust, if that makes sense. And I guess after a while, you know, then I started teaching right away when I moved back home to LA, and then I was teaching maybe 11 classes a week. And I just made that commitment to myself that it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about anything but my purpose. And I really felt in my heart that I would be guided by Source.
That's the interesting thing about when you get into Kundalini yoga, especially. I think when you like think about all the different types of yoga that there are, you know, like Hatha yoga, Bhakti yoga, devotional yoga, but it seems like Kundalini yoga has this sort of intensity that it sort of like perturbs in a lot of people. And you see that sort of reckoning, at least from my perspective, because I got into Kundalini yoga, you see that happen more often with people that sort of venture into those realms, because unlike maybe Hatha yoga where you're doing preliminary like postures, I like to call it almost like the esoteric side of yoga, because it goes so deep into, I guess, the deepest aspects of who you are. We wanted to get into present tense, kind of where we're at right now, because there's a lot of uncertainty because of the pandemic, and the intensity of the collective experience became a very sort of potent catalyst for many people to go inwards and rediscover themselves. I'm talking about that sort of collective dark night of the soul that people are going through because of that sort of pandemic. There's a number of ways in which people kind of do this. Is they, of course, they go at it alone and they can kind of sit with themselves. But a lot of the people also just do it with the assistance of yoga and, you know, just various different types of spiritual teachings and modalities. And then we have the practices like Kundalini yoga. So where do you find yourself on the spectrum of teaching Kundalini yoga, and what is your response with people that you teach, I guess, in the realm of where we're at right now as a collective?
Yes, that's a really good question. You know, first of all, Kundalini has gone through a lot of, I guess, scrutiny, because the main teacher has been exposed for, as you know, possibly for
we know.
sexual assault. Yes, we all know. So I did take a moment. I took about like 5 months to step away from the practice and also kind of like redefine my relationship with it. But also at the same time, I came to realizations in terms of my own judgment and how I treat one another, and and I just was like, you know what, this practice has worked for me for whatever reason. It's helped me through one of the darkest parts of my life. And without it, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. So I feel kind of I guess a love for the practice. And also I just came into realization that everything has a dark side. If it's like, let's say, you know, like I live in a place that basically does raw vegan, but if you're if you're a true vegan, would you get into an airplane and take a ride because like, okay, fossil fuels, and then the seats are covered in leather? Like, I mean, you know, we can go, how far can we go before we think that we're separate from the darkness, because it's intertwined in our everyday life. And I really believe, especially with those that have that responsibility to be, I guess you can say, like leaders, like spiritual leaders, like you are more tempted with the darkness and to fall from grace. And that's something that we just have to realize about human nature. So it's not that I'm taking away from all the bad things he's done, because there's some terrible things, but you know, we start to dissect every little thing in this world, every issue, and there's always a dark side, no matter what. So what are you going to do? Sit in a room and like not do shit, like be in a cave? So I really believe, to really answer your question, I really believe that Kundalini yoga was meant to be exposed for the bad parts of it, because let's face it, now we have people that are fighting about politics, about the vaccine, about every little thing. There's so much separatism that we really believe that, you know, our truth is our truth. Like you mentioned earlier, Satnam. Satnam, that means truth is my identity. And the more you dissect the truth, the more you realize that it's not just that person over there, they're a messed up person. It's a part of the intricacies of our communities and how we've isolated others. And so I really feel that, I really believe that, you know, Kundalini Yoga, it's not the end all be all, but it is a tool to help awaken consciousness. And right now, especially with all that's going on, like we're seeing the reality of the world in such real time because of technology. So we have to be prepared. Our nervous system needs to be prepared for, you know, how evil this world can get, or the reality of people's darkness and even our own darkness, and learn to kind of like embrace that. And that's what Kundalini brings to the surface. So I call it more of the meditative yoga compared to something like Hatha or like Bikram. And I really love all types of yoga. Like they all have something very special to it. It's an approach. It's just simply an angle. But with Kundalini, it works for me, and it works for me to be a tool to help others rise in consciousness and become more, I guess you can say, in touch with their truth, with that Satnam, their sound current. Also, I call that the nod, with who they truly are. And it's about creating more space and allowing what is no longer in service to gently leave, and then rising in consciousness. And also like not staying, you know, we're very much, I guess you can say, concerned about rising into that Kundalini energy. You know, it starts from the root, it goes straight up through the chakras. But you also have to bring that energy down because we're here on Earth and we're participating in the Western world. So I really love to look at the balance of things, and even from like an objective point of view. And that's what Kundalini has helped with, is like not taking things so personal. And also, right? And
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a big one.
And I wanted to actually talk about that part where you were talking about, because Yogi Bhajan and the 3HO Society, obviously they got a lot of shit because of those stories that came out, those allegations. And it's not anything that's different than, you know, what Osho had to go through with Wild Wild Country and his whole sort of community down there in Oregon when, Sheila was helping him moderate that whole thing. That whole thing comes out. And I agree with you. Those things need to come out. But the one thing that I think people really need to realize is that these people are human. It reminds me of this story that I heard a long time ago of this student and this teacher. It's really, really quick. And the student walks in, sits at the feet of the master, and he's like, "Master, like, why do I have to sit on the floor and you sit on the chair?" And the master just says, "Those that think there's a difference belong on the floor, and those that don't sit in the chair." So we create all these different sort of ideas and concepts in our mind of this hierarchy that exists, and we idealize these figures as being sort of having the same sort of attributes as God, but we forget that they're human beings.
Right.
And that's the one thing that I tell people about Osho, about Yogi Bhajan, is that, you know, they may be further along the path, but they're still human. And it makes it a lot more relatable because you can respect and honor the fact that they have flaws, and that they also still have, and Osho also has a pretty dark past, you know, like in India. So I don't think the purpose is to ridicule these teachers, but just like you said, to take the wisdom that you can extract from these teachings and apply it to your own life, because a lot of what those sages are trying to do is to get you to experience it for yourself, right?
Exactly. And really, it also puts into some type of perspective, or maybe it is fantasy for me, but what is written is for the most part like the best foot forward. So I'm also like speculative of past like gurus from like even the last 2,000 years having these same temptations and having these same tendencies. But there's a reason why they're able to have these followers. And I think that there is that necessity for like even narcissism when you are in this kind of like stage of like being in like the center of attention, because just like from like a biological point of view, like your brain needs to process certain chemicals to get a certain way, and your personality and your environment is all intertwined into making you who you are. But for you to, like, for someone to have the ability and the willingness to stand in a guru or like kind of like a healer state of mind, that takes a certain amount of like narcissism. And I think that just realizing that is somewhat important. And healthy ego, maybe you can say, but we are participating in the Western world. We're not in the jungles of the Amazon. We're not, you know, we're here for a reason, and respecting that however the package comes is truly important. From, you know, like the girl that wears no makeup to a lot of makeup to like, it's just like there should never be this like whole, oh, just because you're in like all white, you're a Kundalini teacher. Right? Like, I think that it's just respecting everyone for their angle and their purpose, and then how they show up, that's divine creation right in front of you.
Yeah, I agree with you. And trying to make it a sort of one-pointed center of focus just seems to kind of, I want to say, limit the vastness of who God is. Like, as a sound healer, because I know you're a sound healer, I used to wear black to all of my sound baths. And of course, if you're contrasting that with Kundalini Yoga, a lot of them wear white, and they have justifiable reasons for that. But everybody creates their own sort of reality around what that means. And I think the age that we're in, the age of Aquarius, which is kind of taking your spirituality into your own hands, you have this acceleration of wisdom and these sort of Eastern teachings circulating through the internet. So you have a lot of people that are diving headfirst into these, you know, sacred practices that back then you had to sit at the feet of a master for 12 years in order to even get access to it. So there's a really large responsibility that people have. But one thing that I do see, and one thing that you actually talked about in your Instagram, was a sort of messiah complex that happens, but you were talking about in your IG, a spiritual sense of discernment, right? Discernment basically meaning that like we can't put people in boxes. You can't say that this is, you know, because you're walking around with a cup of cacao in your hand, that somehow you're more spiritually evolved than a mother that just has 3 kids that works a regular 9-to-5 job. Spirituality is an all-encompassing sort of a world that we should open up to everybody. And I think that's very humbling when you look at it that way, because there are a lot of sort of what I would like to say sort of spiritual bypassers and people that take on that sort of narcissistic tendency when they come up on these spiritual teachings, you know?
Yes, that exists. And the fact that I notice it is also a reflection of myself. Like, first of all, so if you're going to notice something for being, I guess, like low vibrational, that means that, damn, I must have been there as well to a certain extent. But yeah, like I realized that I actually took like a couple months off of like posting, because I just realized that, you know, sometimes it was done to kind of like toot my own horn, or to come off a certain way. And I wanted to get more in touch with nature, and like really just like have like a digital detox to see what I'm really saying and what my truth and my purpose is, not based on what I see and what I'm influenced by. But it really did get like kind of like dark for a second, and like, to be real. But yeah, there is that discernment that is so important, because you know, especially the closer I get into this world, and then like having to create like, I guess you can say a presence like online, that made me feel, I don't know, I guess I wasn't coming from an authentic place. So then I started to notice certain things that were being said, that were put out by even like friends in my own community. And then I'm like, I don't know if that is the right way forward. I feel like there needs to be a way that encompasses all, not that leads with judgment and with separation. And we see a lot of that in these communities. Like, spirituality has to be now like something that occurs in Malibu, like in like a, I don't know, like with a set designer, and then we have candles, and we have all, you know, like all sorts of things going on. I'm like, no, I think that it can be at a nightclub where you're dancing on top of a table, like drinking tequila. I think that's a spiritual experience as well. Like, I mean, maybe it's more sloppy, but it's just that we've come to the state where it's trending to be spiritual. So you are going to see a lot of different variations of it. But sometimes it's like, does it always come with a sage bundle? Like, does it not? Yeah. So I'm starting to just really look at that. Like, the appearance of it has been branded now.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's not fair, because then it puts a division between those that probably are curious and want an understanding and want to experience this, but they're like, I don't know, I don't like the smell of sage and I don't want to wear those clothes. Like, I don't know, like, do I have to wear all white? So
It's funny that you bring this up. We've had other guests on. I don't know if you're familiar with the gem goddess, but she's also very beautiful, and she has, gets her eyelashes done, has a full face of makeup, long extensions, beautiful hair. I mean, she's gorgeous, right? And people would comment on her YouTube videos and say, "Oh, you don't look psychic." And we're like, well, what does that mean? It's when you think of a psychic, you're thinking of, I don't know,
crystal ball,
Zoltar and a turban, and
yes,
I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
what you were talking about, this sort of this almost like tinge of narcissism. It almost seems hardwired into that sort of spiritual journey, because it starts in an innocent way, at least from my experience, because you touch on something very, very unbelievable and phenomenal, right? Like you get a tinge of source, whether or not it's through plant medicine or whether or not it's through meditation, and there's an impulse in you to want to share it with other people. But one thing that we don't realize about these teachings is directly we start coming from ego in order to translate something very sort of eternal and something very all-encompassing, and it kind of gets distorted. And I think at some point we check ourselves and we realize, okay, well, this is a sort of inward revolution. It doesn't have to look a certain way. Mm-hmm. It's almost like the ego has this tendency of taking one thing and wanting to spin it into something else. And I like to make this comparison, which is, there are people that try and do yoga all day long, and they save it for maybe every Tuesday, and they only do it during a certain period of time. I'm talking about meditation. But then when you listen to teachings like Eastern masters like Sri Ramana Maharshi or H.W. Punja, they're talking about every waking period of your life should be meditation. But it's a hard concept for a lot of people to grasp, because they're used to some sort of practice. Like the ego needs a practice to implement into action. Yeah. But what they don't realize is that, but they don't realize is that awareness is always present, only you somehow take yourself out of that state. So you can never not be in meditation. So that's the sort of contrast, which is like the ego needs a process, but awareness can't be really taught because it's something that you are. And I think that when people start on their journey in a very innocent way, they want to make it their own, and then, and it's almost like that game needs to unfold, that sort of thing needs to happen.
Yeah, that game definitely needs to unfold, and I believe it is unfolding. Like, we're having this conversation right now, so it's also being in the present moment and realizing the beauty in all, and that's a meditation itself. And I love that you bring this up. Like, one quote that I always remember, it's from the Soul Cycle teacher. I think her name was, I don't remember right now, but she said, "How you do one thing is how you do everything." And I'm like, that's a meditation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a meditation, but it's like, okay, so you make your bed, you half-ass make it, right? You're like, oh, I'm just gonna like rake right now. I'm just gonna kind of do it, but I won't do that section. my clothes. Oh, you take your stuff to the laundry, and then like something drops. You're like, I'll just put that in the next load. Like things like that. Like how you do one thing is how you do everything. So, and I do say to my students that after you leave the class, that's yoga. Your everyday life, like how you treat one another, your thoughts. Like I realized like pretty much recently, because I've had so much change happen in such a short period of time, but I realized recently that my inner dialogue is like talking a lot of shit to myself. Like it's like, what the fuck are you thinking? Why are you saying that? Like, no, don't do that. Are you gonna fucking wear that? Are you serious? Like, I'm like, why is it so like I'm cussing in my head to myself, and it's like, I'm insulting myself, and I'm like, where do I get this? And I realized that a lot of it's culture, and it's like upbringing, and it's, I don't know, my love for rap music, and it's like a lot of like other things. Like, it's like, I'm like, I need to stop doing that. And that became also like a yoga practice. Like that's a meditation. So really, like the one thing about Kundalini, it does come with like, does come with a, with humanology, which is what Yogi Bhajan called it. It's like his own version of like, I guess you could say psychology of like, we start our classes for the most part, like maybe talking about like astrology, about world issues, about relationships, like whatever the intention is for the class. And then we go into a practice, which is, we have a Kriya that is, there's Kriyas for like for manifestation. There's a kriya for, I don't know, for,
Like the Kirtan Kira.
yeah, there's a
the,
lot of
the
them.
Kirtan Kira.
There's 10,000 kriyas. So every Kundalini teacher, for the most part, if it is by way of Yogi Bhajan, they're teaching with a book. So that way, each part that is in each asana is done from one to the next to create that purpose, that intention, right? So, you know, there's a lot of there's a lot about it that is like, that is very precious, right? The process of it. So it is like a very powerful, I guess you could say, classroom. So that's why I guess it's like, in one way, it's very powerful. And then the other part that I realized, I don't know why I got into this. Should I still talk about this? You asked a different question.
No, just flow. Yeah, whatever comes to you.
I did want to bring up, because you were talking about a few minutes ago about the sides that we have, right? And I know exactly what you're talking about, because the deeper we go into this sort of spiritual journey, we just somehow assume that we're just going to annihilate the ego and it's just never going to come back. But, you know, the one thing about the ego is, it's, me and Jen talk about this all the time, it's that one force that you absolutely have to collaborate with, because just like what Alan Watts says, like, thinking that you could destroy the ego is the biggest ego trip there is, right? So the whole point isn't to completely eradicate the ego, but to understand balance. And that's something that you were talking a lot about, which was balance. I mean, and basically in that, I think that represents itself as just accepting the fact that you have these sort of cultural sides.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that they're also your ability to navigate and ground into this sort of society that we're in. That rap music, that hip hop music, that black metal music, whatever it is that you listen to, is your conduit to teach your message. And that's the one thing that I'm a really huge advocate of, because I like to keep one foot in, you know, eternity and one foot on the ground, because I think people deserve that. Because that's one thing and you may actually experience this, but when I used to do sound baths, I used to see the same people in the community there every single time. And that's a great thing. But if the goal is to reach to a much broader audience, to people that aren't familiar with this, then you need to speak their language to some extent, and you need to ground, you know, your message into a very practical way that they can understand it. And my whole goal isn't to create polarity and saying this is spiritual and this isn't, but to teach practical ways in which they could, you know, follow the teachings of Kundalini Yoga or Hatha Yoga or any level of like meditation or spirituality in a practical way. Because that's really what it is, right? Like this whole, you know, being present is very simple. It's very practical, but we like to make it very complicated.
It's so practical.
So I think it's important.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's so important to be grounded and accept the fact that we have these sort of, I guess, seemingly dark sort of Mara sides to us, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. And all those little things about your personality are what make you you, right? And what attracts people, like Eric was saying, that may not be in the community. So that's where they find a common ground with you and where you become relatable. So I think that's really, really important.
It does help. Yes.
Yeah, totally. So I had a question about your awakening specifically. You know, just hearing about your story and hearing you being a businesswoman in New York, then coming to LA, getting married, getting divorced, and, you know, now you're out on the sabbatical in Joshua Tree. So you kind of hear that a lot, you know, whenever you hear about someone having a Kundalini awakening. It's not like a regular awakening. It's a total shift in the way that you live your life. So was it a Kundalini awakening that brought you to the place that you're at now? Or was this more of a slow burn? Was this more like a regular awakening that kind of evolved into something different?
I believe it was a combination of events, and I would call them like mini awakenings that were happening throughout the process. So especially with like, I would probably attend like maybe 3-4 classes a week when I was in New York before I got my certification. And each class, it would just be like this like little nugget that was planted, but I always felt more clear coming out of it. And then also it was a combination of the classes. And I mean, I don't really recommend this to anyone, but I probably did a total of 7 ayahuasca ceremonies when I was in my whole life, but they were all done in New York. And those experiences led me to just become more clear with my purpose. And I just like kept on seeing myself like getting out of I guess that like everyday life. But I was like, how is this going to happen? How am I going to make this work? But it was like sporadic awakenings. But I did have a big one on Aya, and then I had another big one during a sound healing.
Oh, wow. So what happened?
So in Aya, what ended up happening was, well, first, like, I was attracted to the medicine, and I didn't really know why. At the time, I didn't do any psychedelics. I probably just smoked a little bit of weed, and that was it. So I was very scared. So ayahuasca was my first psychedelic, and
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was my first psychedelic.
That's intense.
You took the back door.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I was on my third year of business on my own. It was in New York. I was doing pretty well. And I just felt like something was missing and I couldn't really figure it out. And then was talking with a friend and an acquaintance, and he said that he was going to be doing this ceremony. And I was like, I would like to partake in it. And he had me interview with somebody that allowed me into the circle, and they flew in a shaman from Peru, and it was done with like such gracefulness and style. It was a small ceremony. It was I think like only like 15 people, and like it was $150, and it was just so heart centered. And basically during that ceremony, I realized like I first, it's like the first time like tripping out, I guess you could say. Like I was like seeing psychedelic things. I'm like, oh wow, this is fun. What did I miss out in high school? But anyway, but like to be real, I got to this point where my heart started to shift because I started to stop thinking about me and start thinking about us. And I started to look at the world as like more of a collective rather than just from my own viewpoint. So that was like one of the biggest gifts that the medicine gave me was, I guess like more empathy than I could even imagine. Like I really get into these states where even like the worst person possible, I'm like, what got him to be that way? So yeah, I was my first experience with it was definitely profound. And then throughout the process, like I would sit with the medicine either every 6 months or every year until I left New York. And New York was the last time I did the medicine. And actually I got divorced in New York, and then before it was like maybe like 6 months before I left, I did a circle, and I just like purged like my ex-husband, and I purged everything that was like dark about myself, and just like these like really, I guess like anything that I was like holding on to. They say it's like doing therapy for like years, and I think it was true because I was able to let go of a lot of what I was no longer in alignment. Like he was a beautiful person, and you know, we got along really well, but it didn't work out for whatever reason. But to purge that in the amount of time that I did, I was just like kind of on this like path. And then I was shown at in that same ceremony a vision of myself like in white, but like probably like 65, and I was teaching like a lot of people, and I was like, that's cool, that's interesting. So from there, that was I think about like a few months after that, maybe 4 months after that, I began to teach and like and like basically have privates with my friends in the city. And that was around the same time that I got fired from that job, and then I was like, okay, now what do I do? So it all kind of like flowed into this, like not only was it like an awakening at a moment, but it was also life was just like pushing things aside that weren't going to be in alignment with my purpose. So that's basically what was happening. So yeah, from the job to the ex to like packing my things to like leaving to saying no to a few job offers to like, yeah, that was like that whole self was just an awakening. And yeah, but it did happen. Yeah, once I guess that a few times in the Aya, and then one of my friends, we did a winter solstice ceremony. I think it was the end of 2018, and this was when I was like, I'm doing a lot of workshops, and like collaborations with like different friends that also became healers. It's like, I don't know, it all just happened together. And it's my friend Janelle, and she has a really she's an amazing sound healer, and she has an incredible story. But basically when she was playing the sound baths, like I started to feel physically like a sensation from my lower chakras, like just like change. And it was like coming up through my body, and it was just like rising. And then I started to have visions of, like, I don't know if it's another lifetime, a memory or whatever it is, but I had visions of myself in like ancient, I want to say it was Egypt. And then there was like this voice that was talking to me, that was saying like, you're meant to be here now. And like something about like protecting like my, I don't know, my, who I am until this moment right now. Like there's a lot that's supposed to be happening, and I'm supposed to help others heal and raise their consciousness. And a lot of the people that are around you right now are part of that journey. So there's like a couple of sound healers that were in the room, and the owner of the studio as well. And then I just like started to really feel that connection of like the necessity of like creating this new community. And that was all through the sound bath. It was incredible.
How did that come through as an experience? Like, were you hearing voices? So you saw a vision.
I saw visions. That's correct, right? Yeah. And it
Okay,
was through the sound bowls, like the way she was playing it and the way she was toning, it felt like my DNA was getting activated, and I could physically feel, I haven't had this experience since then, but I could physically feel like my lower chakras just like kind of like feeling like they're on fire, and then the energy just rising. And I was almost like kind of like, I was lying down at the time, and I could, and I was like, you know, kind of almost like a and I don't have like epilepsy or anything, but I was shaking. I was definitely shaking. I was like, whoa, what is going on? But it felt like a feeling that was rising, like some type of like sensation. And it was amazing.
What I think that what that reminds me of, and you can probably reflect on this, but that sounds like a Kundalini awakening, right?
Yeah.
Because you're feeling that energy coming from the root chakra, the base of your spine. So you have that sort of serpent force and sound is a really, really great catalyst for that, you know? And I know exactly what you're talking about, because my story is almost very similar to yours as a sound healer, because I've always sort of been very clairaudient. And I always experienced a lot of sort of mystical states through sound. And I go through that just on and off throughout my life. And it's a super powerful sort of energy. And one thing you mentioned was Egypt. And the one thing that I think of is like Hathors, because they worked really, really, really closely with sound. Did you have any affinity with Hathors in Egypt? Did anybody ever tell you that before?
I never did until I guess recently, but I haven't really gotten into it. But I'd love to hear more. But there's definitely I don't know. It felt like there was I don't know. It feels like it was like these voices, like you're meant to be here, and then that your soul traveled from like another system into Egypt, and then part of your soul was like hidden for the last couple thousand years, like in the Philippines, and then somehow like it came through in Canada where I was born, and then you're here, and I'm like, okay, like I don't really understand it. I just trust it, and I didn't really go into it. I was like, okay, that's cool. Like I've never. And after that, like that was probably like when I would do sound healings with a couple of these healers, I'd have very kind of like light visions of these like past lives with them. And then also a few of them have, because one of them is a Akashic sound healer, and she also reads like Akasha. And then the other one, he definitely had like lives in like ancient Egypt. And he's just like, every time you'd come over me, like because we had these like monthly workshops. He's like, every time you come over me, and I do some Reiki over him. And then he's just like, I had this vision of you teaching in like an ancient time to like a lot of like people. And it's just like, he's like, but I was there too, and I was next to you, like I was like side by side with you. So there's
Yeah.
like just
Wow.
something there, like, and the other healer, I'd love to introduce you to her as well. She definitely has like these memories. So
Yeah.
there's just like something there, and I never had that before with anyone else. And funny enough,
You know,
That's cool.
one of the healers, like I kind of like grew up with her. Like we used to like go clubbing together back in the day, and like how like
yeah.
the same like fighting group, and then we separated ways. I went to New York, and then I came back to LA, and then when I came back, like I hit her up right away, and then it was just like kind of like somehow meant to be.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's interesting how like plant medicine has the ability to just give you a perspective that most people obviously have trouble with in their regular everyday life. And Terrence McKenna had a talk that I heard a while back where he talks about like culture being an operating system. And the simplest way that I can put this is that, you know, you have a computer with a hard drive, and somehow these plant medicines are able to erase the disk to some extent and allow you to start over from a very sort of like, you know, seemingly archaic sort of perspective, which is probably just the basis of awareness. And I wanted to ask you this question because I know a lot of people that have gone down that path, and it, as much as it is a blissful experience, you get a lot of wisdom from it. It's also like this wrecking ball that goes through your life, eliminating a lot of, I want to say, illusion or untruths or things that you think are good for you. And it's not always a pretty process. So there's some people that will just completely decide to up and leave their, you know, 3D life and just
Yeah.
head to the mountains and, you know, sell off all their things. And maybe that's their journey. But was it hard for you to integrate after having that experience with Aya back into the 3D?
you know, where we did the Aya, it was like in a kind of like a yoga studio situation with like no windows. And then afterwards, like in the morning, you get up, you dance. It was just like such a beautiful celebration. It's like about 15 people, and then you get out. You go. So where we were practicing, it was where we were gathering. Excuse me, it was in the Flatiron district. So I take the elevator down, and then I come out, and it would just be the city. So I had no choice but to integrate. That's what I'm trying to say. Like
Yeah.
right after doing I'm not in a jungle, right? I'm in New York
Right.
City. And then that itself was like kind of a beautiful spiritual experience. I'm like, okay, well, for some reason the medicine traveled here. So I'm gonna trust that it's here to heal part of like New York and that it's its own entity in some way. So no, not necessarily it was hard, but maybe like a couple days, like I needed to rest, but I was like back to doing what I had to do. And that's how I feel like for my purpose, it was meant for me to integrate the Western world, and it wasn't meant for me to start in like the Amazon, in Peru.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that was a huge part of my journey. And some people will argue with me, no, it needs to happen in the jungle. And I'm like,
Right.
well, no,
No.
it
Yeah.
came here. So
Right.
why not?
Yeah.
Why not take advantage
Yeah.
of that? And why not allow the medicine to work through New York City? Why should it not?
Yeah.
And where
They're
it
like
needs it the
those.
most, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. There's like those same people that said like, you know, in order to awaken the Kundalini inside of you, you need to a guru to help you with that. We're living
No.
in a much more evolved time now, right? Where we have the ability to take accountability, a large amount of accountability for our own sort of personal sovereignty, and that involves, you know, of course, being responsible with it. But the one thing that you mentioned, like, okay, balance, I think is really, really important. I think the role of a healer is to be in these sort of densely populated communities where a lot of oppression and a lot of sadness and struggle exists. You know, like it's not always practical for somebody to be in, you know, the beautiful mountains of Peru, you know, and I always think that like being able to be amongst sort of like the wreckage and help sort of rebuild it, I think is a lot more powerful. And it's not for everybody, but I think being able to integrate that into the society in which we live, I think is really important. I remember this talk that I saw at Lightning in a Bottle, and I think I may have been with you, Jen, where there was a panel of shamans, and a person walked up and was like, I'm having all this trouble integrating my experience because I spent, 2 weeks in Peru doing ayahuasca, and did it like 7 times. And I came back and I'm just completely falling apart. I don't know how to reintegrate into society. And one of the shamans just looked at me and he's like, you know what you need? Sometimes in order to ground, all you need is just a nice juicy cheeseburger.
That's right. Oh my gosh, I totally
Do you
forgot
remember
about
that
that.
one?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Because they were hoping that he would say some real profound sort of
Right.
shaman shit.
yeah.
But he was
And he's
just like, look,
no.
you have to, it's not about completely removing yourself from the 3D. It's about like reintegrating and finding balance. And all that
Yeah.
sort of thing is about balance, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to back up a little bit because you mentioned Akashic sound healing and also the hologram sound healing. I've never heard of either of those. So what is that?
So it's there's this incredible sound healer, Dr. Paul Hubbard, and he has this method called holographic sound healing, and it's based on kind of like some, I guess you could say, like Egyptian, like alchemic reasoning, but you basically use like the sound bowls and also your voice as a way to open up consciousness. So it was like a 2-day training, and I use a little bit of his method, and especially because I don't think I could sing very well, but he teaches you like certain methods to just really not only work with like holographic like light as like it's basically the flower of life, and as a visionary component to the sound. So you can imagine this light in possibly like your heart. You can give people this light. You can imagine it in every single being and every entity and objects, whatnot. You can create like millions of them within one space because you're dealing with the flower of life. So a lot of it's like visionary, and it's also working with crystal bowls and the ability to really connect not only vocally but also from a space that is very intuitive. It's a beautiful practice. So working with that, and I mentioned that one of my good friends, she is an Akashic sound healer, so she opens up your records with sound.
Whoa, that's cool. So, but someone's not reading them for you. Are you receiving those messages yourself?
She
So
reads
she's
them.
opening-
She reads them for you.
Oh, she reads them. So this is like a one-on-one thing.
Yes.
It's not like a group thing. Oh, whoa. How cool is that?
Yeah. It's pretty damn cool. So
Yeah.
so sound as a whole, like it's becoming not only just like a modality for healing, but it's also I feel like an undervalued way of like communicating with others, because I can say the perfect words, but with sound you can't really lie about it because you can hear someone's like essence, like not just their voice, but you can hear, or you could even feel it in like the vibration, if it's like tuned to like that right frequency of like truth, or if it's like off somehow. So that's
Yeah.
like what these modalities have shown me. And even I play very intuitively, like I did mention that I do have a music background in piano, but that allowed me to read notes, that allowed me to be very technical with sound. And I probably took lessons for about, I want to say maybe 10 to 12 years. And it was, but I never could play like intuitively on my own. Like I can never like just like hear music and just start playing it. And some people have that ability, but it wasn't the way I was trained. So I kind of was like a little bit disconnected from my own practice of like playing the piano. And then when I picked up sound healing, it opened up something that was, not only was I able to utilize my understanding of music theory, but also take it to a place of like letting go and just like
Yeah.
listening and feeling the sound.
Yeah.
So I feel like that
That's-
is a huge part of my practice, and I learned that through Kundalini Yoga.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about mantras too, right?
Exactly,
Is
'cause of the
that
mantra.
you're even just doing seed syllables. You're hearing these frequencies of sound that can't be distorted through sort of conceptual frameworks. And that's the one thing that I really love about sound, is just like you said, is that words can get mixed up and everybody has their own perspective and definition of whatever words that you use. But sound is just like this universal language that can't be misunderstood. It can only be experienced. So it's like the ultimate teaching in and of itself. which is like you can talk about sound, but there's nothing like actually being there. And this is another thing about sound baths, and you can probably kind of vouch for this too, is that like these are people that are coming into your class, they're putting themselves into probably the most vulnerable position, because the only people that go on their backs are ones that are going to sleep, And so we're in this space collectively with a group of people in this position of sleep. And as much as the sound is just sort of a driving force of this, you're also experiencing this sort of unity and this call for unity amongst the people. And it's a really humbling sort of experience to be in that.
It really is. And yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to make a kind of a cheeky comment, because every time I go to a sound bath, I don't know why I'm always so damn tired, but I feel like I fall asleep every single time, and I'll wake up, I'll have like that falling feeling. And I'm like, oh, and I'll wake up and I'm like, man, I hope I wasn't snoring. But anyway, there's always that one person. Yeah. There's always that one person in the class. It's like,
the funny thing about those classes is like at the beginning, we always say, okay, if your partner or person next to you starts snoring, you have permission to nudge, but everybody's just so nice. They don't do it.
Yeah.
It's I actually encourage it. I'm like, if they're snoring, that's part of the practice. So allow them to rest. And then the last overnight sound bath I did, which was like right before the pandemic hit. So we, there was this girl that was sitting next to another girl, and they both didn't know each other, and they were both lying down, like, I guess 2 feet apart, not COVID compliant. But anyway, and one of them started to snore, and then the other one was like kind of like like just like really upset about it, and then like and then she fell asleep, and then she was snoring.
Oh.
You're like, see, that's what you get for acting bitchy.
And all you can do is really laugh, because
what else
makes
can
you
you
realize
do?
that, like,
So I feel like, snoring is part of it. I've been guilty of snoring as well. And there are some facilitators that get upset when it happens. But like, what can you really do? If people are that relaxed, let them relax. And let them snore, maybe have it. And then I start to like, make the gong, like kind of go with their snore. So, but then it becomes like a fun experience. But like we are also easily irritable about snoring. Like why? Like
that's when you listen to like somebody's like Muji, for example, like you listen to his talks and he's in the middle of like Rishikesh, India, and you hear like horns in the background, you hear a baby crying, and he's completely unaffected by it.
Yeah.
Because it's a part of their culture.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, it's like you could also look at that as its own sort of spiritual teaching. Like, why is it that creates an issue for you?
And that's so true, because at our studio in New York, I was at Golden Bridge Yoga, and it's in the middle of Soho. We're about usually two floors above everyone, and then it's a busy street, and you hear like people yelling, screaming, honking. And in the beginning, it used to bother me, and then I realized that that's part of the yoga too. Mm-hmm. Those are all those sounds, and that's okay. Like, it's okay. And then allow it to quiet. Not why am I allowing my attention to make this an irritable experience? That's my responsibility. It's not, what am I going to do? Go outside and be like, hey, I'm doing yoga. Fuck off. Like, no, you can't. Like, what?
Shut up. Shut the fuck up.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
So. That my whole sort of like adventure into sound healing, it really changed my relationship to just the frequency of sound. And I even find myself listening to music that doesn't have words. And
you do listen to a lot of music that doesn't have words.
Yeah, it doesn't have words. And I'm just more, I don't want to over-identify with somebody else's story, which I feel like people do. And that's not to say that music with words is bad. But I like the rawness of the sound. And the one thing I wanted to bring up is that the more I do these sound baths, the more I actually start to experience sound as motion. It's motion. It's like audible motion. And it's not like I'm even creating the sound. It like already exists in the space, but you're creating the conditions for it to actually manifest. And there's no beginning to it and there's no end to it. It's just something that is eternally always present, but you create with enough love and compassion and beauty, you can manifest that through an intentional sort of love into being,
I agree with that. I think that's why many people see like sacred geometry or
I do.
Yes, because it already exists.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Eric and I have a mutual friend. Her name's Rose, and she plays gong as well. She has a symphonic gong, and this was my first time ever hearing a symphonic gong. All of the gongs I've heard, over the years have been planetary. So it just sounds so different. It's so chimey and has, I don't know, it just sounds so different. And we were out in Joshua Tree for New Year's, and she was playing for us, and I could see like the sacred geometry like coming off of the gong, like in the sound waves. It was so beautiful, so incredible. But
yeah. And in the same way, you remember when me and Jen, we went to Joshua Tree a while back, and we had our friend Nancy, and she was also a classically trained sort of gong player, and she has a moon gong. I have a sun gong. And the way that she approached it is as if sort of like this gong was its own sort of force, like its own sort of like primordial force, and you have to respect it. And there was a certain point where she was playing this gong where she was being filled with all of these different emotions, and some of it were good, and sometimes she'd cry, and sometimes she'd feel happiness, and she was just became this conduit of energy that was coming off from this gong. And it's such a mysterious thing, because you can't exactly put your finger on why gongs are so just powerful. But when you're in front of a gong, you know what I'm talking about. When you're in front of it, you can't help but feel that you're amongst something very, very sacred,
Like amongst the presence of like royalty, it feels like, and there is a sacredness to that instrument itself. Like it has a resonance that really vibrates throughout your soul. Like you can just kind of feel it coming in through your body, and then like the way it cycles in and out. It's like I feel like it is like that infinity. Like it flows and it becomes a part of you, and then it's like moving your hands, and then it's moving your breath. And then I also found that breathing into it while you're playing like gives it kind of like this like that life force, and it's such an incredible experience to also understand the subtleties of it. Like, like some people, they play really, really loud, and that's okay. Some people play low.
Yeah, and how it hits like different organs and different areas of your body where you, for me, Eric has an earth gong too, and he played the earth gong at our house one time, and it was just tearing up my stomach. Like I thought I was going to shit myself. I was like, oh my God, I got to get out of here, So it's really interesting how sound can affect like affect you on such a cellular level.
Yeah. Even down to like seed syllables. Like when people think of Om, when you're like really, really coming from your diaphragm, it actually starts at the base where at your root, like the Om, and then it comes up and it kind of just does this little thing where it goes all the way up to your 1,000-petaled lotus. It's crazy how like these sounds penetrate different areas of the body,
Yes, I will admit too, when I first started my training in Kundalini, my teacher was like, okay, you have to chant like from a certain place. And I was like, well, I don't really sing well. They're like, we'll talk after. And then we never talked. That didn't happen. I just continued the training, right? But eventually it got to this place where my voice changed. So I used to have more of like a high-pitched voice. Yeah. And so the training, I think it's also like the subtleness of like listening to mantra, and also having a daily like mantra like embedded in our practice. Like we were like required to do something for 40 days, for like 11 minutes, for 31 minutes. And so that allowed me to like go through the cycles of like listening to a mantra and being like, oh my gosh, this is boring. What am I doing? I have better things to do, to starting to listen to how I sound, and then to my relationship to the words, to eventually just like this shift in not only my relationship with sound, but my understanding of not only myself, but of others and of the world around me. And like, it's just like sound does that. It really does. And the mantra, like I highly recommend anyone that's like, like doing music, like creating music, or like, like attending drum circles, to have like a daily mantra that you do for like 3 to 11 minutes. Because if you don't understand your own sound current, how can you listen to, your instrument as you're playing it? So
yeah,
we're not all as blessed as Eric. He has a magical, beautiful voice. So
of course he's Filipino.
He sounds like a little angel.
I try because I also I channel light language while I'm playing the bowls
Yes.
and when I hear the gong, and we can connect and I'll let you know about that. But one thing that you mentioned with Kundalini Yoga is I know they typically do the Adgaridame, Jugagadidame, Sagaridame, Jidigudame, like that while you're playing the gong. Did you start doing that? And if you did that change the way that you sort of approached your gong playing, or did you just decide on, you know, for like a different mantra while you were playing, or maybe just no mantras at all?
It's really what comes up. Sometimes I do breathe in some mantra. Sometimes I just intuitively play. Sometimes, yeah, it's not really, it really depends. Like if it's like maybe a certain type of full moon and I feel compelled, like I kind of sit there, like I with source, like I have these conversations. I'm like, what feels right? And then sometimes like a mantra will come up to my head and that will be one that I will implement into the sound healing. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's just like silent, like it's like you can think it, but don't speak it, but play it. So there's
Yeah.
sometimes that comes through, but it's also listening to the vibration of the people that I'm with. Like if it's like, because they all have like their own, you know, even if you talk to them beforehand, you can kind of get a sense of, you know, if I'm playing from one type of frequency to the next, like what they really need. So it's like I listen to them prior to like our sound baths and to get a
Yeah.
sense of which direction to go. So it's a lot
That's
of
the beautiful thing
intuition.
about like sound baths that I know is that like it's one of those practices where you're also a recipient of it, even though you're facilitating it.
Absolutely,
You
yeah.
know, so like even while I'm playing the bowls, and you have some people kind of in your class that are going through various different types of emotions, I find myself sometimes coming to tears, or I feel anger come up, like all these different emotions. It doesn't stop. And so it's good that I look at it very much the same way as you, which is like it's a collective sort of movement. Like you're seeing the whole room as one sort of energy, and you kind of have to move with it, you know?
Yes, it is like an energy, like it's ongoing and it's really feeling out the whole room. And you know, when somebody, like let's say they clear their throat or they sneeze, like I take that into consideration with the whole experience. Or if they kind of like move a certain way, they move their shoulders, I'm like, okay, like there might it's not that it's like personal to me. I'm hyper aware of it while I'm going through the sound journey.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just being aware of that, like my ability to kind of like really tune in with like different people at once, I can I can really gauge like the direction. And I really also love like one-on-ones as well, because that allows me to like really focus on that one person. But you know, if it's like a group of like, you know, 15 or like, you know, from like 10 to 15, it's like, all right, there definitely is a certain energy that is collected. Because I do believe people somehow share energy when we're all together. Like, you know, you come
Oh, for
in, you
sure.
feel a certain way. Maybe, you know, like that sage bundle's going on. So, you know, like there's
The
like,
Palo
there's,
Santos.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's certain things that are happening, and um, you kind of go with that precedent that is set, and then from there you can build. But I really feel like it's such an intuitive thing. Even if I come planned with like one certain mantra in my mind, sometimes like the energy is just like, no, 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 we're gonna go this way instead. I'm like, okay, let's do
Well,
it.
that's like
Yeah.
the perfect
Yeah.
way to embody the moment, right? Because you're being present. You're not over intellectualizing how you're going to do this. You know, you're showing up and in the moment, and you know, delivering what the moment calls. I wanted to ask you this because, of course, you're in Kundalini Yoga, and if you actually go online on YouTube, and you can find a lot of different videos on Kundalini Awakening, and I feel like there's a lot of misunderstanding about what that actually means, because it can so easily fall into the realm of, you know, the sort of secret type of stuff where you're trying to unlock certain doors in order to manifest wealth kind of shit. And I wanted to ask you, like, how you feel about people deliberately trying to draw this energy from their spine in order to manifest something, or do you think that it should happen naturally?
You know, this brings up right away. I was hired at the last Bhakti Fest that was here in Joshua Tree, for this company
Oh,
to do a sound bath like throughout the whole time. And there was this guy that kept on coming to my sound baths. It was like in this like tent, and then people would just like show up. Like I'd start playing and there'd be nobody, and all of a sudden there's like 50 people lying down. But he like kept on coming back, and he looked at me. He said, "How do I was in India and I was with this girl, and he was Indian too." And then he goes, and then he opened up this area here. How do I recreate that? And I said to him, I was like, that's not my responsibility. You focus on your awakening is your responsibility. First of all, that has nothing to do with me. I'm just simply a guide. And second of all, if you're so hyper focused on this awakening happening one way, you dismiss any other types of awakenings from happening. Like there can be all these blessings around you that are occurring, and you're so hyper focused on recreating that one moment. I feel like that for me, I think that you're concentrating on the wrong type of energy, and see the abundance in all. There's so much to what we're doing right now, but he was so focused, and I was like, just let it go. That's his journey. Maybe I'm judgmental. I don't know. So it doesn't have to happen one way. It's different for all. Some people will have an awakening because they had a car accident. Others,
Right.
it simply just happens. Some through meditation, but really it comes through sometimes prematurely, which you don't want. But I feel like with Kundalini Yoga, it allows your nervous system, like through the breath work, through the mantra, through the practice, the stretching, the asanas, through all of it, the combination of what it allows for, it does give you a base to not only build your nervous system and
Mhm.
to help yourself prepare your nervous system to prepare for the rising of that consciousness, that rising of that Kundalini energy. But there are also teachers that have never had it and still teach.
Mhm.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure you've heard about that. So in terms of how the awakening needs to happen, and what I've done with my own life, I was like, I'm going to let go of trying to force an experience and simply live my life, because I'm not going to be 80 one day and wasted my life trying to have an experience when life is all around me. So I feel like the importance of the presence is kind of part of it, but I don't know about, those videos that say that they can force or help you through a Kundalini awakening. I mean, that's like a really big statement, and I feel like that's a little dangerous, because you give a false sense of like expectations to someone that might not be ready for it. You don't know if they're on antidepressants, if they have a certain amount of like psychosis, if it's like, I just don't think it's a safe place to be
Yeah,
in, like, and even in an
I agree.
authentic way. Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Like I always look at Kundalini, it's like you will have gone through your own sort of curriculum and work in order to naturally sort of create that sort of thing to happen. So when you're sitting there trying to focus and try and force this, this prana like through your body, like this Shakti energy, like it's like you said, it's not always sunshines and rainbows. It can be like a wrecking ball that just goes through each one of your chakras and realigns all of the things, that all the untruths, all these sort of illusion. And there are some people that just aren't in the place to accept that in like a cohesive sort of grounded way, you know?
Right.
Yes, and it's also maybe, I don't know, like I don't necessarily think it's right. Maybe someone that's facilitating it might know something that I don't know, but just based on my experience, I think it's fair to say that allow life to happen, and allow yourself to see the blessings. And I also feel like if you're so hyper focused on the awakening happening one way, you miss those micro awakenings, because I had so many of those where I just like woke up with like more empathy rather than judgment, or I decided to treat someone a lot better than what I would used to, because based on what they apparently did to me, and then just approach it from a different perspective. So for me, that's an awakening. One of my favorite examples that I share with my students is, we have this one move where it's, I forgot which kriya it is, but you put your arms out, the palms are down, the fingers are together, and then you hold here with in a cross-legged position for like, let's say 11 minutes, and you just breathe. right? Eyes closed, focus third eye. So your arms are out to the side, and you just keep your arms to the side parallel to the ground. So that one move, when I first did it for, 11 minutes at Golden Bridge, I don't even remember who the teacher was, but while that was happening, I kept on like thinking to myself, like, what the fuck is wrong with her? Is she like psychotic? Why would she make us do this? Blah, blah, blah. Like I was thinking, projecting so much shit to her. And then eventually, I think it was like at like minute 6, I was like, well, I can just put my arms down. And then I started, and then after that, it became, where do I get this behavior, this need to automatically go to like, what the fuck is wrong with her for making us do this? I paid for this class. I'm here. There's a lesson. I can like just get the fuck up and leave. So why am I thinking these terrible things about her? And she's just leading a class. So that itself was a huge awakening. It didn't feel like a certain thing, but I worked through some shit. Like some psychological shit of like judging another person, thinking that they're trying to harm me, and getting into a space of like, you know what? No, she's not wrong. I need to work on my shit. Like, so that was an awakening. It's a micro awakening, but it's not like I didn't see the light in the tunnel and like start floating or, levitating or anything. But I call that an awakening.
Yeah. One thing that you like mentioned, and that's a really, really good word to segue into, is awakening. And awakening means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Like I understand the awakening that you're talking about, but if you go online, social media, for example, and this is one thing that we started our conversation with, is you go on IG and you're seeing story after story of people talking about awakening, right? A type of awakening, whether or not it's driven by spirituality or whether or not it's driven by the collapse of a government. But it's created this rise in sort of like spiritual narcissism, just like you say, because I see it.
Yes.
I see it. And it's hard because there's this part of you that's probably still based in 3D that feels compelled to be like, no. Like you're creating division. You're creating polarity. You're choosing a side and assuming that the person on the other side of the fence is wrong. And so I wanted to ask you, like, what is it that we can do in order to get ourselves out of this sort of like almost form of neuroses and approach it from like the real sort of authentic awakening that you're talking about, those mini awakenings, these real meaningful awakenings, like, because I see that, I see it, and it does speak to a lot of sort of like Messiah complex, people telling people what to do, and it's hard to not feel triggered by it.
Yeah, I love that we're having this conversation, by the way, because it's so much in alignment with all that's come through, and I feel like it's definitely a collective energy that's flowing through. And I mean, like we're meant to speak about this, but yes, that neuroticism is so apparent, and I feel like what we can do, and I take it back to even a person like Marianne Williamson. She talks so much about like A Course in Miracles. It's like, am I choosing love in this situation or am I choosing fear? And it's as simple as that. And like me coming here to Joshua Tree, it took a lot of like letting go of just a lot of my ego, and kind of my even like my standards, like they've just like completely shifted. And there are moments where like I'm like talking shit to myself, like I mentioned earlier, and I'm like, the heck did I just do with my life? Like sometimes I even think like, okay, if I just get it, I can easily get like a job and do things from my old way of doing things and make 15,000 a month and like whatever, and just like forget it, like forget all the spiritual bullshit. Like it goes through my head. Stuff like that does go through my head, and then I have to remember my purpose, and I have to remember that I'm here for a reason, and that things are definitely shifting, and not just for me, but for everyone collectively. And like the doors apparently open today with we're doing this interview on the 15th in California, where masks are now like, oh, okay, well, if you're vaccinated, you can go and do whatever you want to do, unless the store says otherwise. So there's like, these things that are just here for a reason. And to be a part of that shift, it takes, that spiritual discernment. right? That understanding of like, you're going to hear a million different opinions and there's going to be so many angles. What if like most of them are correct from that person's perspective? But living in an age where discernment is sometimes even not even an option. I have kind of like Insta famous, Twitter famous friends that have been canceled from Instagram, from Twitter, because they had a slightly different opinion about the vaccine, and they're not even anti-vax. They just said something.
Anti this
Yeah.
vaccine.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to be very, very sensitive. And I like that you brought up Marianne Williamson, because I love, Return to Love, Course in Miracles. Like it's very, very simple. And she says, there's only two sort of forces in the universe. And actually one's not even a force. It's just the absence of another, right? So she talks about love being the moderating force and then fear being the absence of love. And the polarity seems so strong right now. And it seems so simple to just go online and see like, okay, this is obviously love and this is obviously fear. And people are choosing a side. And it's driven by this sort of collapse of things that are happening around. And it's easy to fall into this sort of like existential crisis and being like, oh, everything is bad. But this is, I think, awareness in source is being like, actually, this is kind of really good, because this is sort of like a dark night of the soul experience for people. And it's sort of like that reckoning, so where God comes in, instead of rearranging your furniture, he just burns the entire thing down so that you can rebuild it again. And I feel like I'm hoping that we go more towards that path, that dark night of the soul happens, and then people begin to awaken and rebuild a much stronger foundation,
That's the hope, but also realizing that everyone is on a spiritual journey. So even those that are working on Wall Street that would never listen to this podcast, that think in such different ways, it's their own journey. And that gives me just kind of like not necessarily like a lazy, like at peace understanding. I mean, I still get irritated and, still have moments where I'm like, what are those people doing? I don't understand. Like, I can still get judgmental, but for the most part, it's just this like understanding that if you were literally in anybody else's shoes, you do and think exactly what they're doing, because it's not, that's not you. So I don't know. I feel like empathy is like a huge part of that as well. Like choosing love over fear as much as possible, but having empathy and getting to that state where we no longer have to take things personal, because for the most part it isn't. And that's been a journey. Yeah.
And it's like, it's so easy to kind of like play into this whole utopian society sort of perspective that a lot of people have. Now, when I say like awaken, I don't mean that like suddenly we're just going to live in this sort of brave new world where everything is perfect.
Yeah.
A lot of people believe that though. But the one thing that I need to also accept is the fact that these sort of injustices and this sort of shadow may actually always exist. One, because it almost has to a certain extent. Like you have to have these people that think differently, and you have to have these sort of contrasts that happen, because those contrasts are the reason why all three of us probably made our way through this sort of spiritual path, So I think it always speaks to a lot of what we're talking about, which is balance, not overly identifying balance with each side.
Yes, balance is so necessary right now. And I also realizing that, like, let's say our parents, right? They had to live in a very like Piscean day of age where they did things for others in many ways, did things for pride, and based on pride and shame rather than, I guess, like love or fear. But our parents had to go through what they went through, and a lot of it now might be considered abusive, not right, just culturally unacceptable. Like, I had to sit with my mom. I'm like, Mom, you need to stop calling people fat. It's not right. Like being Filipino, you know what I mean? Like, it's like our mothers are just so judgmental.
From a different time.
Yeah, it's a different time. So understanding they did the best they could with the tools they had, unless they were on crack. But, my mom was such a great mom. But she does have her shortcomings. And then when I started to get angry about it, I had to take a step back and put myself in her shoes and try to think about what she had to go through. So it's like, it's not fair for me to be like, well, that was abusive behavior, when it really, she didn't know. So I'm learning a lot about a lot of the things that we've categorically placed as not necessarily good, as probably the best that people could do with the tools they were given. And even as far as like someone that has like harmed someone that I love dearly, I try to understand their perspective as much as possible. And it's imperfect. There are moments where like I'm stubborn and don't want to see it, and then eventually I have to think about it and get past my ego and get past those barriers.
Yeah.
Like as a, you know, I do consider myself a healer, but I am still a human being. So that process, it just takes time. You know,
Yeah.
it takes a lot of
And
time
it's
to
like you
find that
mentioned,
balance.
like breaking out of like what is categorically spiritual is really important, because it's easy to see somebody that uses curse words or somebody that, you know, calls somebody fat is not spiritual.
Yeah.
And we can create this whole scenario in our mind of where this person needs to fall on that sort of pyramid. They're bad and they're not good, but you know your mother, and you know that deep down she really loves you, you know? So it takes like a different type of discernment where it's like you're collectively seeing, like you say, like the oneness in everything, knowing that like they are you and you are them. And the fundamental sort of archetypal experiences that people go through are kind of the same. They're just interpreted in different ways. And it makes it so relatable, you know, like we all have the capacity for love. We all have the capacity for pain, and people are not really any different. We all experience these things together. So I think like looking at it from awareness and not seeing, you know, it basically seeing through the words, like seeing through a lot of these things that keep us and prevent us from really connecting, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have shared so many wonderful teachings with us today. Is there anything left that you want to share with our audience?
What's
Or if there's
left?
one kind of lesson that you want to leave behind? I know this is a hard question. People always...
The one thing that comes up, I believe it's Ram Dass, or no, who said it? It must have been either Ram Dass or Yogi Bhajan, but it's, you don't see love in all, you don't see love at all. So that's like helped me really get to a state of like very like humbling, not only myself, but like really forgiveness for, you know, like getting past that victim state. And even looking at someone like, let's say Harvey Weinstein, right?
Yeah.
Like we can all agree that his actions are horrible, but if he were to like say, all right, I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing what I can to empower those that have been sexually abused through the system. I mean, how beautiful would that be, right? Like to take responsibility rather than deny the what you've done to hurt others. So, I mean, that's like a pipe dream, but I really feel that, you know, our system has done so much to keep others separated. Like, you know, look at the prison system. We say, oh, those criminals over there. So that to me feels like an issue. And to really get past that, it's to create a space where like prisoners and everyone from every background, we can coexist somehow. But we spent so much time, I guess you can say, condemning others rather than allowing them to heal, because people are supposed to heal to move on with their lives, unless you want to just hold it over their head like, oh, that person's a criminal, blah, 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 killed this and that. Like, it's like, well, people fuck up, and to get past that, that's how we heal as a whole. And to me right now, that's a really big part of my journey. Also bringing back, this comes up right now, but bringing back the importance of the word God and being safe with it, rather than thinking of it as like, for me, it's like Catholic abuse while growing up, like not being safe with the word God. I mean, how sad is that? And that's sound, and that's sound vibration as well. Like the word God needs to be something that is felt safe in the hearts of all. But instead, some people, when they hear it, they get really upset and it causes them
Triggered,
pain.
yeah.
Right. But
absolutely.
How can we bring the vibration of that word up again? So yeah, that's a little bit of, I guess, what I have to say. Yeah.
So it
That's
sounds
beautiful.
like to me, yeah, I thought that was really beautiful. So what I heard was working on labeling people and also judgment. I feel like that was kind of the overarching, everyone has an issue with judging themselves and judging others and putting labels on other people. And
Yeah,
we
and
just
practicing
need to come from a place of
forgiveness.
love. Yeah, and practicing forgiveness, absolutely.
Forgiveness. Because if we know what love feels like and we know what pain feels like, then we must know what they, you know, what the potentiality of them healing must be like as well. Because if we have the capacity to heal, so do they.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really, really beautiful that you mentioned that. And
Yeah.
your story is just really, really inspiring, because I mean, one, you're basically embodying your entire practice. You're out there in Joshua Tree, just living off the grid, and you can just, you get the sense that like you're still actively in your practice. And it's really, really inspiring that we have people that have enough courage to go into and have their sort of Christ in the desert moment.
Right.
And
Christ
to
in
be
the
really
desert.
humble and honest about the journey, because it isn't always the most comfortable,
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
but
not,
we learn the
actually.
most. We learn the most about ourselves when we place ourselves into, like it's like what Osho says, is like courage is a love affair with the unknown. And I feel like you,
Yeah.
you fully embody that,
Thank you for recognizing that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's been a journey. I invite you both to come to Joshua Tree for like a weekend or whatnot. I'm doing these sound healings in a cave with a nature walk as well.
Cool.
It's through this new company that I'm putting together with my partner. It's called Joshua Tree Alchemy. But we're doing, even you, for you, Eric, like the way I'm building it is to allow for other sound healers to come through. So it's not just like my show. So it's and in the way it's built in is through like kind of like tourists that want something to do in Joshua Tree. So it's like, hey, take a hike in beautiful energy rich land with boulders like Joshua trees, and then we'll lead you to a cave, a secret cave, and then we'll sound
yeah.
bath you. But I'd
I
love
would
to
love
have
that.
you as a guest as well.
Yeah, I'll bring my sungong over there and we can play together. That'd be
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. So is
That would
there
be super cool.
anywhere where people can look you up, and where do people go to find information on how to get a hold of you, how to schedule?
Yeah, so it's kundalinisoul.com. That's SOUL.com. And also new account for what I'll be doing in Joshua Tree. It's Joshua Tree _alchemy on Instagram. So you can
Ooh, that's a
find
great
me.
name.
Yeah.
You're also under Kundalini _soul, right?
That's my that's my other Instagram. Yes.
Yeah, and she has a lot of different offerings. She has sound alchemist meditation and spiritual teaching. She does Kundalini fire. She does deep meditation, sound alchemy, and journaling. I mean, she's got a lot of different things that she has as far as offerings on her page. She even has a 6-week course that says the Self-Guru Initiation.
The Self-Guru Initiation, yes. That one I do through the lovely studio called Jupiter Soundscape. And a lot of what I've actually spoke about today with you is covered in this course. And it's about realizing the guru within you rather than finding it through like a person like in India and whatnot. And it worked out really well, especially when I was teaching it throughout quarantine, because people were stuck at home, and it's like, how can I be spiritual? If I wanted to like go to Tibet and like meet with like a guru, I'm like, no, you can actually, part of the practice is finding the tools in your everyday world and working through what you need to work through. So it was a very, I taught it already twice. I'm going to probably teach it again in October. And it was a very powerful course in terms of the empowerment that I saw from my students working through their kind of like their self-doubt and, perceived limitations, and getting them to a space of like trusting their own intuition. And also in that course, I teach them how to teach a meditation class.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's super powerful. Well, I really, really appreciate your time. It's been like really amazing sharing space with you. And me and Jen will have to come down there and share space with you over down there in Joshua Tree.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
guys
I'll
have a
have to come check
space.
you out.
You have a space to stay here. It'll be really fun. I'd love to take you to that cave, and then we can like all sound out. So so come sooner than later, or maybe later when it's not so hot. Maybe September, but yeah, we'll plan for something for sure.
Yeah,
Okay,
we'll
sounds good.
definitely stay in touch. Again, thank you so much. You've been a blessing to speak with, and we hope to talk to you soon. You're welcome on the podcast anytime. We can talk about probably anything at this point. So
Whatever you want.
Yes, thank you, Jen. Thank you, Eric. This has been
Thank
such a
you.
pleasure. So much in alignment. Thank you for all that you do. Very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you guys. Thank you so much, Ramona Soriano. Again, you guys can reach her on Instagram, her website. She provided that as well. For all you guys tuning in, thank you for tuning in. If you're watching this on or listen to this on Apple Podcasts, you could actually like and subscribe if you'd like. If you go into the details section, you can find the video of our episodes on YouTube. If you can, like and subscribe, do all the things. Keep connected with us. You can actually reach out to us on Instagram as well. under Divine Nobodies Podcast. And if you guys have any questions, you can reach out to us at divinenobodiespodcast@gmail.com. Other than that, we'll see you guys next time. Namaste, friends.
Namaste.